I don't know what sparked my interest in photography. It was an interest that I've had since I was a kid. And I just loved looking through the pictures that my folks had in photo albums of the family and stuff. And I wanted to have a camera and make my own. That's all that, it's probably how most of us got interested. The places that I have been painting and photographing are about the same, and they are places that are similar to where I grew up, and then even more boreal and northern as time passed and I traveled farther and farther north. And the appearance of the far northern landscape struck a stronger chord with me, and it felt like it was a visual representing. It was a gave me the opportunity to uh, choose the forms and the shapes that I was looking at and representing as if they were metaphors that reflected and referred to the way I felt about life. How's that for generality? We could, that photograph we talk about it was shot in a very, very early, misty, foggy morning, and there were, as I recall, a couple of dead trees that had fallen into the rapids that was out front, and they were most likely jack pines, which have rather erratic and odd-looking shaped branches. And the trees surrounding that are also next to that are also jack pines, and they're very ragged, crazy-looking trees. They sort of look the way I'm talking. They're not organized and symmetrical and logical. In the background, you see the fog softening this effect of the sharp pointed trees pointing up at the sky. And as I recall, even the shadows of the lights where the sun comes through into the fog is affected and created. The shapes are created by the shape of the light shafts coming through those trees is reflects the triangular sharpness of those trees. And even though it's a kind of a soft landscape, it is influenced by these sharp tree forms. Compare that, for instance, with some of Monet's paintings of the river, which I think some of them are a little bit foggy, and the whole thing becomes very harmonious. In this case, it's peaceful, but there's an edge to it that's not harmonious, I would think. Um, the Northern Lights photographs is kind of a lucky event and a bit of a lie, would be one way to put it. It was a lucky event because I just happened to be camping at a certain spot where there was a long sand beach, which up in the Quetico is very unusual because most of the shorelines are ragged and rocky and really see out into the lake as smoothly and easily as you could there. It's a place that people have called the Pines for years and years, and it was a spot at on the eastern end of Pickerel Lake that has been used since pre-European times because of its real comfort for people with canoes and traveling. And I just happened on one trip to be there at the end of a trip and went down to the lake to just sort of look around one evening, and there were northern lights. And even though that's quite a bit farther north, you don't see northern lights very often at all. And so I ran back up to the woods and got my camera and set it up in a tripod and decided to take some pictures. And I have maybe 3 or 4 negatives from that experience before either the lights stopped or it got to be too dark entirely or whatever it was. That was a long time ago. I don't remember. But you can tell by looking at it that the exposures were real long. Probably a astronomer could tell you exactly how long because you could trace the amount of movement of the stars. And that was just inevitable. Now the fact that it was a real long exposure, which I needed to record that light, which was really quite dim. What am I saying? Oh, because I had to use this long exposure, the lights, which actually have shape and move and pulse and do all sorts of interesting things, that was all neutralized, and it turned into a kind of a vague wave of light through the sky. You would have needed equipment far more advanced than what I had with me at the time. And I think that they have it now because I'm seeing aurora photographs that are more specific. When we printed the photograph for the MOA show, the copy that you have for your show, that was then, the negative was digitally reproduced and printed, with a digitally. And we faced the question there that we could easily take the stars out and just sort of make it a little bit more like what the experience would have been. But we decided that just would have not been right, so we left them in. Each photograph that I've ever made is a happy circumstance, and the photographs are a uh, direct response to what's in front of you at the very moment you're standing there or walking through the woods. And half an hour later, it might not, you might not even see what you saw, um, because the light may have changed, or a little bit about the angle of your approach might have changed. Your mood might have changed, uh, and what you see that you choose to turn into a picture will be different, and so it might not be as interesting as was the first time. So even though like the Northern Lights was a lucky break to be there on that one particular place at that one particular time, every single, and that's it's a very obvious example, an easily explained example of that. Um, each one of the photographs in there is the exact same thing, the same lucky coincidence. And in many times I've gone back to the same spot and tried to rephotograph it for one reason or another. And each time that happens, it becomes a brand new photograph, even though I could conceivably be standing in the same exact spot, looking and pointing the camera at the exact same rock. It still turns into something else. The relationship between the photographs and the paintings is not easy to define, and the photographs were made specifically and only for their own direct use. And in terms of them being used in paintings, it basically doesn't happen. The photographs do serve as a memory reminder of what it's like, and but it's a memory reminder of what it's like to be there more than it is what it looks like there. Um, they Paintings are made up fictional things as if I was a writer, describing a scene, and the specific details that might be included are chosen to carry an expressive message or an expressive load, rather than for to playing any descriptive purpose, which is I think a big difference between my work and realistic work or realism work. And although I like to look at the photographs a lot, I like to look at them as photographs rather than as information for paintings. I'm sure that there's a cross fertilization, which is inevitable and hard to ignore or hard to avoid, but it's not an intentional thing. Where I run into a visual problem in a painting, I go and get a photograph to look at it to see, how that should be, how it should be portrayed. This is different, however, than when it comes to things like the animals or the birds flying through paintings, because that stuff there painting those things requires a specific set of information that the eye literally can't see as it's happening in front of you. And so there I have to look at images that have been captured by a camera to see the colors and shapes and so forth of forms as they actually appear. And a lot of those photographs, and so therefore they're photographs, and a lot of those photographs are things that I've found in magazines or books or other places. I don't have the facilities or the equipment that would enable me to make those photographs myself to use. So that's just, that's all clip art. When I first started making serious photographs, I was exposed to a photographer, a very good photographer named Joseph Chakna, who's teaching a summer school photography class at the same place I was teaching drawing and painting. And since I was interested in photography, I worked in the darkroom a lot and showed him my pictures. And he says, "Yeah, well, they're pretty nice, but they look just like a painter made them." What the hell are you talking about? And he said, "Well, painters make pictures that look different than photographers do." And it took me a while, and I still don't know what he meant, but I came to the conclusion. It was one of those great comments and questions where there's no answer to it except for the answer that you make up for yourself, rather than a correct answer that fits everybody. And the answer that I concluded was that they were pictorial recordings of what a place would look like. And I suppose, like what's in a calendar, from Bloom or something like that. And I didn't think of them that way, but as I looked at them, I thought, well, that might really be the case. And so I had to start reconsidering what a photograph should look like, as opposed to being a document of something. And I learned that I had to look through the screen of this camera, the viewfinder, and look at it instead of through it to see the picture, the landscape be outside of the camera. And once I started looking at the screen as if I was looking at a painting, which is really ironic because here I was doing this because I was taking pictures like a painter, and I had to learn to look at through the camera like a painter. Um, but I learned to eventually uh, see a structure on that screen that was more important than what was being depicted, what was being photographed outside. And that structure would be something that was a combination of diagonal lines, horizontal lines, vertical lines, round shapes like the rock, dark shapes, light shapes, and so forth. Very, very much like an abstract expressionist painting. You learn to see that. I learned to see that in the camera, and then I learned after a while that certain arrangements of information on that screen were more pleasing or exciting or challenging than other kinds were. And some of them would just be too easy. Some of them would be at times, well, okay, just leave it at that. Sometimes they were too easy and sometimes they were okay. Walking through the woods, uh, almost stumbling upon this situation where this rock was right in the middle, which was a format that I really enjoyed. Anyway, as you can see that from another photograph in the exhibition, and it was counteracted by uh, tree trunks laying down with a certain kind of a detail in the foreground and a different kind of a detail in the background, and they were arranged almost like in a Joan Mitchell painting with a great big smear of something in the front and jagged, ragged brushstrokes around the outside. And that then became the purpose of the picture. And further upon taking it, then the camera would have been moved a little bit up and down, left or right or whatever. The camera could have been turned on the tripod a little bit in order to take the forms and arrange them in relationship to the outside edges of the picture. And so it became they always became a practice of uh, creating this expressive design using the information in front of you. The information in front of you is just the details. It's the description in the story, but the story is not that. The story is also that plus what the design gives you. These photographs that you have on the wall are all digital prints made by doing a high quality scan of the original negatives and then using Photoshop uh, to prepare them for printing. Um, the I like doing that very much for two reasons. One of them is that I no longer have a dark room, and so I can't do that. And the second reason is that the kinds of controls that you would use in a dark room with silver gelatin prints are a real pain in the ass. Trying to burn and dodge, uh, uh, agitate the film or the paper just properly, get the temperatures all right, make sure the paper doesn't crinkle, just oodles of things that are really, really a pain to do, and and are very inaccurate and very broad and imprecise in specific spaces. And learning to do it is an incredible skill and is as much a part of making those photographs as taking the picture is. and I respect it enormously, even though I hate it. And I kind of mastered it after a while. But once I discovered digital negatives uh, and using Photoshop, and discovered that with Photoshop, all of those controls in the darkroom were, all of them were at hand, and with more options uh, than you could do in the darkroom, it became a very, very liberating and creative force. Uh, for instance, in a dark room, you could say burn an area in, by which means you add extra light to a certain part of the picture and making it, therefore making it darker. With in Photoshop, I could do the same thing, only only on, there's too many onlys here. I could do the same thing, but only in the darkest areas, not the lighter areas, the medium tone areas that are within that area. Um, and so instead of this broad, uh, uh, mushy general darkness, you can make a very specific one that would only deal with one of the three areas, light, medium, or dark. That's just one example of that, where it's allowed for creative ideas that expanded upon what the negative originally contained, and allowed the person doing it to actually continue being creative much more than you could in the dark rooms. So the creative process lasted longer than just the 30th of a second while you're taking the picture. Um, there is discussion that digital photography is got its own uh, set of processes or whatever and influences, and some people dispute parts of it. And I have no interest in the conversation. I'm not taking photographs with a digital camera anymore. I do, but not trying to make serious artwork out of them. It's just the only logical format right now that's available. But when I look at photographs that are published, you can just see a whole lot of misuse of the visual features that are available both in the camera and on the computer screen when you're doing them. And they're wonderful as they are, but they're just obvious as the dickens, and they're blaringly crazy. So I don't respect them. And these photographs you've got in the show are totally the opposite of that, where the only working that's being done is the equivalent in the expansion on the normal darkroom work. But I would acknowledge that one of the biggest rock in the middle of a mossy forest is one that's sort of become iconic, and people identify me as a photographer to some extent around that photograph. And that was one where I was just lucky that everything just fit together very nicely and could uh, create that image. There weren't trees in the way, there weren't the shadows or light streaks in the way or whatever. It was just, everything was just right at the moment. And that just doesn't happen very often. So I like that.